A man named Andrey was sitting on a sandbank by the river. His stooped shoulders seemed to buckle under the weight of unknown thoughts that gnawed at him from the inside. He was holding an almost finished cigarette in his hands. His fingers were shaking slightly, causing the ashes to fall unevenly onto his dirty jeans. The shovel lay on his lap carelessly, as if it were an abandoned tool, but there was a strange heaviness in its presence. The man took a drag, inhaled so deeply, as if he was trying to inhale not only smoke, but also air, to saturate his body with oxygen, which seemed to have become viscous and unpleasant. His hands were shaking. Maybe it was the cold of the water. Maybe it was indecision. Although that didn't stop his thoughts from remaining icy, even prickly. Death! He looked at the waterline again, where the river was slowly slipping away into the distance. Death is only the beginning of emptiness. Or is it the end? He tilted his head back, staring up at the gray, fading sky. The sunset slowly burned down near the horizon, leaving only the blue, freezing all the heat out of the air. The forest behind him was silent. No birds calling, no leaves rustling. Only the river splashed softly, flowing around the black stones near the shore. Andrey took another drag. His hand twitched, dropping the ashes directly onto the metal blade of the shovel. His gaze was clouded. However, he did not notice it himself. He had long been accustomed to the strange state in which his thoughts were floating. We're all afraid of the dark, he thought, squinting at the darkening forest on the other shore, which stretched to the horizon. We're afraid because we can't see what's inside. But isn't that weird? What if there's something out there, deep in the darkness, waiting for us? The darkness is alive. I'm sure. She's breathing. She sees it. He lit another cigarette and took a drag. The tip of the cigarette flared up, making a reddish dot in the gathering dusk. For a second, he seemed ridiculous to himself, sitting there like a fool with a shovel on his lap, talking about something that a normal person would not even dare to think about. But the laughter did not come. Instead, a heaviness gathered inside, somewhere under the ribs, in the very heart. He exhaled smoke sharply, as if trying to get rid of an obsession. If the darkness really sees us, if she's looking for something in us, something close to herself, something dear. His eyes narrowed. He peered into the river, as if there, under the surface of the water, the answer was hidden. What if she wants something sinister? Something that not everyone has. And if she finds it, she accepts you. Not immediately. No. She would study. She would sneak up. But sooner or later she will make you her own. The man threw away the cigarette butt without looking, and it fell into the sand, leaving a tiny smoking trail. He slowly ran his hand over the shovel, as if testing it, feeling it. The metal was cool, and the handle fit comfortably in my hand. Those who died, those she took away can be found. In my dreams, they rarely come. They never speak directly, but you realize that they are no longer human. They're not the same as you remembered them. They saw her, the emptiness, and they became a part of it. He froze for a second, gripping the shovel tightly. The thoughts came one after the other, lingering, painful, like leeches, digging into his mind. They filled everything. Where are they from? Why can't he get rid of them? Andrey shuddered, as if with a chill. He ran a hand over his face, wiping away the sweat that seemed to stick to his skin. Another cigarette was taken out of the pack. The lighter clicked in his trembling hand, and once again the fire flickered in front of his face. Why do I know this? Why do I feel like the darkness already knows me? She's waiting for me. She's watching. She's waiting for me to become a part of her. But wasn't I a part of it from the very beginning? Isn't something in me hers? He took another drag, and at that moment he felt something move behind his back. Whether it was the noise or just his sick imagination, he didn't know. But the forest behind him seemed so alive. The car rolled slowly along a narrow dirt road, cutting through the night silence of the taiga. The old UAZ seemed to creak to the beat of its driver's thoughts, as if sharing with him the burden that he had been carrying on his shoulders all his life. The headlights picked out the sparse silhouettes of pine trees from the darkness, whose branches seemed to lean towards the road, as if trying to listen. Andrey nervously tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. The cigarette was hanging in the corner of his mouth, and the ash was falling right onto his threadbare jacket. He smoked one after the other, but it didn't help. Thoughts drilled into his head, taking him back to where he hadn't wanted to go for a long time. In childhood. The closet. Damn closet, he thought, pressing the filter of the cigarette with his teeth so that the cigarette almost broke. An involuntary grimace twisted his lips. He remembered the smell. Dampness, rot, and something else that resembled moldy bread. He remembered how the narrow gap between the wooden doors let in only a tiny ray of light. Sometimes it was mixed with the voices that sounded outside. Strange, loud, indifferent. He sat in that closet, hunched over, hiding his face in his lap, so as not to see the oppressive darkness. You're a weakling because you're afraid. A voice that had been dragging on for years made its way into his mind. Someone from the caregivers. He no longer remembered the face, but he remembered the words. The weak should be strong, and if you can't, then you belong here. In the closet. A pussy. 8 years old. He was 8 years old then. He often woke up in the middle of the night, shivering, in a wet bed. They didn't bother with washing. They just pulled off the sheets, threw a rag at him and pointed to the corner where he should have been sitting. But more often they were locked up. In the closet. Brat, he muttered to himself, trying to drown out these memories. But they only became brighter, more painful. The guys from the senior groups, they made me a dark one. The words themselves sounded in his head, sharp as a whip. He didn't like remembering, especially about these boys who were a couple of years older than him. He remembered how they waited when the teachers turned away, how they grabbed him by the collar of his shirt, weak, stupid, and with a button nose, and dragged him into the same closet, which was already familiar to him to the point of nausea. They beat, crushed, and whispered their vile threats and taunts in my face. Not for punishment, no. For entertainment. Are you afraid? Bespectacled? Come on, yell. Yell. No one will hear you. He didn't scream. Then he would just close his eyes and hide deep inside himself so as not to hear their laughter. But most of all, he hated himself for humiliating him, for waiting for this every night. I knew I was going to wet myself again. I knew I was going to be there again. In the closet. The hands on the steering wheel trembled, and the car jerked slightly to the side. The man swore and twisted the steering wheel more sharply. The headlights illuminated the dark trunks of the pines. He forced himself to concentrate on the road, but the memories continued to torment him. Maybe everything would have changed if he had remained that downtrodden boy. But at the age of 10, he realized for the first time that survival requires concessions. He remembered the macaque, the eldest boy from the 4th group, who was 14. He was big, with huge hands and a yellow crooked tooth that stuck out like a fang from his mouth. A monkey's 6, he laughed hoarsely, but the laugh came out dry and brittle. Funny. I can't even believe it now. But it was true. The macaque loved power. He liked to be humiliated in front of him. He liked to be obeyed unconditionally. And at some point, Andrey realized for himself that it was better than enduring the beatings of the others. Do as I say, Macaque whispered, holding out a pack of cigarettes. Then they won't. He remembered the first time he lit a cigarette, choking on a cough, and the elders, laughing, slapped him on the back. He remembered how he carried food, cigarettes, even money for them, stole, robbed even younger ones, and begged in the city. I thought it was salvation, my thoughts returned. But it's just a darkness that started to grow in me. He took a deep drag, blowing thick smoke directly into the cabin, which filled it with the smell of tobacco. The car rocked again, but he kept it on the road. Back then, in the orphanage, he still did not clearly understand that darkness could settle inside. She was whispering to him, "You're doing everything right. You will survive. You will become strong. Later. Later." But now, after all these years, He knew that the darkness was just beginning to show him what kind of power it was. The car stopped at a small hut on the edge of the forest. The ancient UAZ let out its last hoarse sigh from the engine, and the smell of oil and gasoline hung in the air. The man put his hands on the steering wheel, gripping it tightly until his fingers turned white. He was in no hurry to get out. It was quiet outside, except for the occasional rustle of wind in the treetops. The man was sitting in the dark, barely illuminated by the dim glow of the instrument panel, and was smoking his third cigarette in a row. Smoke filled the cabin in thick rings, settling on the windows, but he did not notice it. Andrey closed his eyes and suddenly felt something rushing into his consciousness in a thin stream, like a thin thread stretching to a long locked drawer. The memories are black, suffocating, thick as a smell. The smell of one's own humiliation, fear, and someone else's pleasure. Utility room, damn the back room, flashed through his mind. He was 9. A dark, cramped room filled with old tools, shovels, rakes, sacks, coils of wire. There were rotten leaves in the corner that had not been removed, and the floor smelled of urine. He could smell it to the point of nausea, to the point of tears. The dim light from the window, plastered with mud, barely penetrated through the gray dust. And Uncle Valera, the caretaker and the caretaker. Always sweaty, with dirty nails, in a greasy jacket, he always smelled of alcohol. An ex-con who somehow got a job at their orphanage, always hanging around with a broom on the premises. Valera looked simple and harmless. His half-toothy smile often accompanied the usual phrases. "Well, kid, how's life?" Or, "While you're growing up, listen to your elders. All in a bunch? Come on, pretzel." But that day changed everything. Uncle Valera, grinning, closed the door of the back room behind his back. Andrey remembered how his childish body shrank into a ball, how he tried to retreat, pressing himself against the wall, but there was nowhere to retreat to. Uncle Valera said that we are friends. That's what all friends do. That I just need to be a good boy, obedient. Thoughts flooded in, forcing the man to close his eyes harder. His hands were shaking. The cigarette almost fell out of his fingers, but he squeezed it painfully and broke it, burning himself. It happened once. And then, again. And again. He had nowhere to go. There was no one to tell. Valera always found a way to bring him there, to this back room, amidst the smell of rot and iron. Years later, it all came out. One of the children let it slip. Someone overheard. Or maybe spied. Uncle Valera was arrested and tried. Andrey remembered how, when he was still a child, he was called to the principal's office, how they asked questions, how they made him remember what he wanted to forget. And then, when it was over, they just patted me on the shoulder, trying to put more compassion in my voice, and said, "It's okay, kid. Everything's going to be fine." Those words flashed through his mind like a rusty knife cutting through old scars. He remembered the teacher, her smile, fake, like a cheap coin. "Nothing," she said, patting his head as if comforting a dog. "Life doesn't end there, Andrey." But my life ended right then, he thought, looking at his trembling hands. He forbade himself to remember it. I forbade myself to think about it. But the memories kept coming back, like a drowned man in muddy water. They overwhelmed him, made him feel dirty, broken, damaged. Andrey shook his head, exhaled sharply, and opened the car door. Fresh, cold air rushed in, dispelling the tobacco smell. He left, slamming the door so hard that the sound echoed through the silence of the night. The hut stood in front of him, his hiding place, his prison. He took a deep breath, trying to get that smell out of his head. The smell of rotten leaves and urine, which seemed to be an eternal companion of his memory. But he knew that the smell wasn't outside. He lived in it. He went inside without taking off his shoes. The floor creaked underfoot. The air in the house was saturated with the smell of old wood and dust. Andrey silently went to the refrigerator and took out a bottle of vodka. Opening it, he took a long drink straight from his throat. The liquid burned his gut, causing a spasm, but he only cursed softly, closed the refrigerator with his foot, and headed for the table. The old laptop was in its place. Andrey sat down, put the bottle next to it, and turned on the device. The screen lit up, and after a moment's hesitation, he clicked on a small icon in the corner. The site was hidden and encrypted. It could not be found over the public internet. Andrey monitored the security himself, regularly checking the system. The site was called Dangerous Quests. Those who were looking for adrenaline gathered here, who wanted to test themselves and their courage. Andrey was the curator, creator, and host. He was 40, but it made him feel younger, or maybe more lively. But that wasn't the main point. There were 2 new applications on the main page. He opened the first one, 3 guys, apparently students or office workers, who decided to arrange an adventure in the taiga. They described their plans: survival in the forest, a test of willpower and character. Andrey looked at their profile for a long time, and then added it to his favorites. "Come here," he muttered, reaching for the bottle and listening to his inner voice. At first there was only silence. Then there seemed to be a vibration and light clicks and a whisper. "Yes. Yes. That's them. That's them." The second application was uninteresting. A lonely adventurer with enthusiastic formulations, obviously having read other people's stories about survival. Andrey closed the questionnaire, took another sip of vodka, and turned off his laptop. The lights went out. Silence reigned in the house again, heavy and sticky. Andrey sat down on the sofa, feeling the hot weight of alcohol settle in his stomach. He fell asleep almost immediately. He dreamed of a woman. Her face was blurry, as if through a cloudy glass, but he knew who it was. "Mom?" The word echoed in his mind like the sound of broken glass. The woman was smiling blearily. Her voice was soft but warm, almost enveloping. "You're my boy. You're so good. Just a little more and we'll be together. Forever. United in the darkness. I've been waiting for you. For so long." Her figure became clearer, her outlines clearer. Andrey saw her eyes, dark as the abyss. They looked straight into his soul. The woman held out her arms to him. "You're mine, aren't you?" She unbuttoned her blouse, exposing flabby breasts covered with spots, and began to laugh creakily. The sound grew louder and louder, turning into an inhuman howl. Andrey saw a loop of coarse rope in her hands. The woman stopped laughing and whispered, "By yourself. You can come to me by yourself, my boy. Quickly." She pulled him to her and began forcefully pressing his face to her chest. Andrey felt scabs and rot on his cheek and lips. The voice had changed, and an invisible and creepy creature was growling at the back of his head. "Drink! Drink me, you scum! I died giving birth! You killed me, you bastard!" Andrey screamed and abruptly sat up on the couch. Cold sweat was streaming down his back, and his heart was pounding. He was gasping for breath, looking around the dark room, as if the darkness around him had swallowed up all space, and was pressing down on his chest like a dead lump. In the morning, the sun, breaking through the dusty window glass, illuminated the room, but this light was barely enough to disperse the oppressive atmosphere inside. Andrey was sitting at the table with a cup of cold tea, which he did not even try to finish. His gaze was focused on the laptop in front of him. He turned it on and opened the same encrypted website. The 2 applications that appeared the day before were in place. Andrey reread them, as if checking himself, and then opened the notebook lying next to him. Old, with a battered cover and scratched pages, it became an integral part of his work. After copying the phone numbers from the applications, he threw the notebook on the table. The rules were strict. He always called himself to make sure his clients were really ready. And to hear their voices, he recorded and saved some of the conversations. Andrey slowly dialed the number. There were beeps on the other end for a few seconds, and then, "Hello?" A man's voice answered, slightly hoarse, but confident, even arrogant. Andrey was silent for a moment, assessing the tone. The person who answered the phone obviously did not expect anything unusual. "Hello," said Andrey. His voice was even, but with a touch of professional rigor. "It's about applying for an extreme quest. You left it yesterday." "What kind of quest?" The interlocutor was confused for a moment, but then apparently he remembered. It was like that. And who are you? My name is Andrey. I organize such events. Taiga, survival, real challenges. If you're really serious, we can discuss the details. As I understand it, there are 3 of you. The voice on the phone changed. The arrogance did not go away, but curiosity appeared in him. Come on, what do you suggest? Andrey briefly explained the conditions. 3 male participants will have to arrive at a certain place to start the test. The Taiga will provide them with everything they need. Dangers, difficulties, and a test of strength. I'll meet you at Zaimka, 5 kilometers from Tikhanovo, he said, stubbing out his cigarette in a dirty ashtray on the table. This is a hunting lodge, converted to host quest events. We'll start there. The gatehouse? What is it? The voice asked. There was a hint of mockery in it. Are we sure we're going to get there? If you have a GPS or at least a map, there won't be any problems, Andrey replied calmly. But there was something in his voice that made the interlocutor not interrupt. Okay, when? Tomorrow, 10 o'clock in the morning. Good. The conversation ended, and Andrey slowly put the phone down on the table. He just sat there for a while, staring at the wall. A familiar tension grew inside him, as before each new challenge. He took a notebook, wrote down the time and place of the meeting, and then carefully crossed out the client's number. Gathering his thoughts, he got up, went to the window and looked out at the taiga stretching to the horizon. Her green and dark tones seemed calm, but he knew that her true self was hidden inside, behind every tree. Taiga didn't forgive mistakes, and those who entered it changed forever. Andrey was sitting on the edge of the sofa, smoking another cigarette and thinking. Acrid smoke drifted lazily through the room, but he did not notice it. His thoughts completely absorbed him. A spider's web. A metaphor flashed through my head. Yes, that's exactly how he imagined his work. He was a spider, weaving subtle, invisible webs. His website is just one of the threads stretched into the darkness, where only the most persistent could find it. Andrey knew that it was extremely difficult to find his website. You had to know what to look for and have the patience to break through the layers of protection. These 3 men found him. They wanted to test themselves, enter the taiga, and see what they were capable of. For them, it was just another entertainment, an extreme vacation, an opportunity to show off to friends and post photos on social networks. But for Andrey, it was something more. It was his life. He stubbed out his cigarette, got up, and started packing. His farm was only 5 kilometers from the village, but it was hidden so well that no one could get there without knowing about it. A narrow path overgrown with bushes, hidden by dense pines, led to an old hunting lodge. It was once built for seasonal crafts, but Andrey redid it for himself. In addition to the gatehouse, there was a camouflage dugout, dug so that even an experienced eye would not notice its entrance. In the dugout he kept everything he needed: tools, supplies, weapons. Its walls were reinforced, and the air vents were camouflaged so that they couldn't be found even close by. Andrey threw everything he could possibly need into his backpack: knives, ropes, flashlights, a map, 2 walkie-talkies. He carefully checked every pocket, every fastener. For him, preparation was a sacred ritual. Before leaving, he took out his smartphone and sent a note to the man he had spoken to in the morning. It was part of his terms. Anyone who wanted to participate in the quest had to get to the place themselves. The point for the navigator has been sent. A short message. And Andrey put the phone in his pocket. Before leaving, he looked around the room once more. Everything is in its place. A refrigerator with a case of vodka hidden in it, a simple snack, a sofa, a table with an ashtray. Taiga was already waiting for him, as always. He left, closing the door firmly behind him, and headed for his apartment. The taiga was like a refuge for him, or maybe even a temple. Everything was fair here. You couldn't hide behind a mask here. You couldn't pretend. Taiga accepted people for who they were, or she didn't take it at all, as well as the darkness that he longed to explore inside his soul. The men arrived at Zaimka's house late, cursing loudly. The narrow forest road, overgrown, impassable and almost erased by time, seemed to them a living hell. The navigator lost its way several times, leading them into dead ends, and each of them had to get out of the car more than once to find the way by touch. When they finally got there, all three of them were exhausted, angry, and annoyed. "Damn you!" one of them swore, getting out of the car and slamming the door. Tall, thin, with a haggard face and nervous eyes, he was the first to look around. "Is this the place?" The second one, a stocky man with short hair and sharp features, threw in. His voice was rough, raspy. "Don't get it," muttered the third, slender, blonde, and the youngest, no more than 20 or 5 years old. He spat on the ground and looked up at Andrey, who was standing at the edge of the path. Andrey watched them in silence. Not a word of greeting, not a smile, just a calm, hard look scanning everyone. "Did you get there?" "What is it?" he asked softly, though his tone was more of a statement than a question. "With grief in half," the stocky man snapped. "Is this place deliberately hidden like this?" "Exactly," Andrey replied calmly, turning away. "Follow me." The men exchanged glances, but followed him anyway. The path leading to the zaimka was narrow and overgrown, and every step along it was accompanied by the rustle of dry mosses and the crackle of branches. Andrey walked confidently, without turning around, while the trio cursed softly every now and then, clinging to the driftwood with their feet. When they finally reached the dugout, the men stopped. In front of them was a roughly hewn wooden lid, covered with a layer of earth and moss, almost blending into the surrounding landscape. "What's that?" the thin man asked, pointing at the lid. "Entrance," Andrey answered shortly, lifting the lid. There was a staircase leading down below her. "Really?" The stocky man grinned. "Do you really live in a hole like this?" Andrey did not answer, going down first. The men exchanged glances and reluctantly followed him. The interior of the dugout was unexpectedly spacious. The ceiling was reinforced with wooden beams. The walls were lined with rough boards. There were metal shelves and cabinets, couches in the corners, and a large wooden table with several chairs in the center. Andrey went out into the side branch, leaving the newcomers perplexed, and a few minutes later, a generator rumbled somewhere inside the dugout. "Andrey is back." "What kind of bunker is this?" said the stocky man, looking around. "Disguised, of course, perfectly." "Here we will start," said Andrey, sitting down at the table and taking out several folders with documents from a drawer. "For starters, the formalities." He spread out the papers on the table in front of them. "A contract," he explained briefly. "You sign that you accept all risks for yourself. I guarantee safety within the rules. But beyond that, you're on your own." "That's it?" "What is it?" asked the youngest, speaking for the first time. "No," said Andrey, pulling out his tablet. "Next is the choice of quests. Each of you has the opportunity to choose the challenges. Everything is strictly according to the price list. Payment in advance, in cash. This is specified in the rules on the website." The men gathered around the tablet, reading the quest descriptions. 1. Falling into the abyss. The participant is tied to a safety net and lowered into a deep abandoned mine, illuminated only by a weak lantern. The goal is to get to the top. Duration, up to 6 hours. Risks, disorientation, injury, hypothermia. 2. The buried participant is placed in a wooden coffin and buried in sandy soil. The participant is equipped with a walkie-talkie. Duration, from 1 to 5 hours. Risks, claustrophobia, panic, difficulty breathing. 3. Harassment. The participant is given a head start of 10 minutes, after which the hunt begins. The initiator personally acts as a stalker, using a traumatic pistol. Duration, up to 5 hours. Risks, injury, stress, loss of orientation. 4. The path of fear. The participant must walk along a specially prepared path full of traps, surprises, and sound effects. Part of the trail passes through an old wolf's lair, which may still be inhabited. Duration, up to 4 hours. Risks, shock, injury, panic. 5. Mirror of the soul. The participant is locked in a completely isolated room without light, where recorded sounds are played to him, allegedly generated by his subconscious. Duration, from 2 to 12 hours. Risks, panic attacks, mental stress. Buried? The stocky man asked, scanning the description. Is this a joke? Not a joke, Andrey answered calmly. One of the most difficult quests. The thin man glanced at Mlodogo. He nodded silently, as if agreeing. The stocky man just grunted. So guys, Andrey said, leaning back in his chair, are you ready to take the risk? Or did you come for nothing? A stocky man with gold teeth, Lek, as his friends called him, grinned while sitting at the table and slammed his palm on the tabletop. What kind of nonsense is this for suckers? He drawled the words. That coffin of yours. I spent 3 days in the cellar when I was a kid, on a dare. It's all bullshit. His friends looked at each other, laughing. Yeah. And you burned in a tank and collected your guts from the burning earth. Stop drilling. Come on then, Lek. A thin man named Roman urged. Dig in. Prove that you're a man if you're making such bold speeches. What are you chasing? Lech waved him off, but there was still a cocky grin on his face. Yes, it's easy. I just don't see the point. Weak, huh? The third guy, whose name was Max, put in quietly. Lech looked at them both, frowned a little, but quickly returned a mocking smile to his face. Yes, it's not weak. I'm just that. I don't see the point. Is there even a whole coffin? Won't it fall apart under me? Andrey was silent. He was sitting at the table, motionless like a statue. Only her eyes, piercing and icy, studied the men closely. Everything inside him was shaking with sweet anticipation. They have to do it themselves. Want to do it yourself. It was important. The darkness was watching him now, waiting. She never forgave deception. Roman, sensing that Lech was starting to back away, grinned again. Well, tell me you're pissing, he said, looking at his friend defiantly. Pissed off? Fuck you. Lech abruptly stood up, throwing the tablet with papers back on the table. I don't piss. Do as you wish. I'm in business. Roman straightened up, looked at Andrey and said, Okay, I'll go with you. You need an assistant to make everything fair, right? Andrey got up slowly, smiling coldly. That's right. I need an assistant. You never know what. Maybe I'll have a blood clot or something else will happen, he said in a flat voice, glancing at Max. You're staying here for now, the control one. If anything, you'll know where we went. Max nodded, but there was something like relief in his eyes. Andrey, Lech, and Roman left the dugout, taking shovels. They walked through the taiga until they came to a sandy yar by the river. Everything seemed empty and abandoned here. The wind played softly with the treetops, but the sounds of their footsteps on the soft sand seemed especially loud. In this secluded place, under an old spruce tree, Andrey once hid a large wooden coffin. The boards were fitted with such precision that even wet sand could not damage them. Is that your stash? Lech chuckled, noticing the coffin when Andrey cleared its lid. You said that everything is easy for you. Let's see. Andrey replied without emotion. Roman helped dig the hole. The shovels cut through the wet sandstone with a soft creak. Lech stood aside, but after a couple of minutes he took a shovel and began to help. Andrey worked calmly and methodically. His movements were as precise as an automaton's. His face was completely detached, as if what was happening didn't concern him at all. Roman was breathing heavily. Fatigue took its toll, and anxiety rose with it. He kept glancing at Lech, who, despite his ostentatious amusement, looked less confident. It's scary, isn't it? Roman asked when they finished digging. What's scary? Yes, everything is normal, Lech replied, but his voice faltered. Andrey didn't say a word. He pushed the coffin into the pit, removed the lid, and checked the integrity of the walls. Then he turned to Lech and pointed to the pit. Get in. A shadow of doubt appeared on Lehai's face. He looked back at Roman, but Roman didn't say anything, just spread his hands mockingly and ironically. There was silence for a few seconds, except for the wind rustling through the leaves. Okay, Lech said, trying to sound confident. I told you, I'm not weak. He stepped to the coffin and lay down in it. The dim light of the flashlight inside outlined the wooden walls, rough but tightly fitted. He lay down more comfortably, looking at the lid that Andrey was holding in his hands. Well, it's almost like being in a VIP hotel, he chuckled, nervously trying to hide the tremor in his voice. Put your hands on your chest as it should be, Roman grinned, showing him the okay gesture. Be calm, bro. Everything will be fine. Lech laughed out of tune, folding his arms over his chest in the pose of the dead. Andrey silently handed him the radio and said calmly, just in case. If something happens, we'll dig it out. What's just in case? Lech tried to make a joke, but his voice was trembling treacherously. His eyes were running. Andrey didn't answer anything, just screwed on the coffin lid, and then took a hammer and nails. Lech heard thuds above his head. His breathing hitched, but he refrained from starting to panic. It's okay, he muttered to himself. Everything is under control. Roman stood nearby, watching as Andrey methodically slowly nailed the lid shut. Each blow of the hammer reverberated in the air with a heavy sound. Here we go, said Andrey when the coffin was securely closed. The two of them began to fill the pit with sand. The sand rustled, falling on the coffin lid more and more. Lech felt like he was feeling pressure from above. Hey, I can feel it. It's a little rough here. Andrey just nodded to Roman, continuing to dig a hole. But suddenly he stopped. His eyes met Roman's, and at that moment something in his face changed. Roman, before he could say anything, felt a sharp blow. The shovel that Andrey was working with a second ago landed on his head with a bang. Roman fell to his knees, and then fell into the sand. Andrey calmly threw away the shovel, took out a thin rope from his pocket and began to bind the limp body. When Roman came to himself, he felt that he was lying in the sand, and his arms and legs were tightly twisted, like an animal prepared for slaughter. What the hell are you doing? He began, moving, while his head was buzzing from the blow. Have you gone completely crazy? Andrey was silent. Only his face, calm and detached, bent over him as he pushed Roman into the pit onto the lightly sprinkled coffin. Andrey! Roman shouted when he realized what was happening. What the fuck is this? This is a joke, right? This is a game, right? A quest? Roman began to swear, spewing threats and insults, but his words began to tremble when he felt the lid of the coffin under his back and saw Andrey's gaze. Andrey, stop! Wait! Are you kidding me? Roman's voice cracked. Leahy's voice came from the coffin. What's going on out there? What the fuck? Roman, is that you? Andrey coolly stared into Roman's eyes, which were dazed with fear. He smiled and nodded his head understandingly. Andrey took a shovel and with the tip raked a low edge of sand on Roman. There was no anger or pleasure on his face, just a cold, frightening detachment. The bound Roman began to struggle and squirm, trying to get out. His voice was getting louder, going from rude screams to hysteria. Let me go! Get me out, do you hear? It's not funny! Andrey, I'll rip your head off when I get out! Lech was silent, but after a few seconds he also started banging on the lid. His voice broke through the walkie-talkie hanging on Andrey's chest. Andrew, damn it. What are you doing, crazy? Dig me out now, bitch. Andrey turned off the radio without distracting himself from his work. His voice was soft, almost gentle, with a terrible irony. Everything will be fine. Death is easy. Soon, you will find yourself in darkness. Lech hit the lid again, but Roman's screeching was heard above the knocks. Fuck you, you freak. Let us out, you scum. What a scum you are. They'll avenge us, you bastard. You're messing with the wrong people. People know where we went. Her voice was a desperate plea. Let go. Let go, bitch. No one will know anything. I'll pay you. Just let me go alone. Do whatever you want with these. Andrey continued to fill the pit with sand, ignoring the screams. His face remained calm. Each new layer of sand muffled the sounds, and soon he was left alone with silence. 20 minutes later, the pit was filled in. Andrey took a last look around the place, smoothing out the sand with a shovel, and turned on the radio. The sounds remained underground. He knew that they would definitely be there. I knew that Lech would beg to dig him up, and Roman would silently twitch until he suffocated with sand. The walkie-talkie he gave Lech will sit down in 5-6 hours, so there is still time to enjoy his horror. Andrey sighed, put the shovel away, and headed back to the dugout. Now it was time to finish with Max. At the same time, Maxim was in the dugout. It was relatively clean and habitable. There were simple wooden cabinets in neat rows on the walls. A table with a worn surface occupied the central place, and things were neatly arranged in the corners, as if someone had lived in this dugout for a long time. The air was heavy, a little damp, but not fetid. The only sound was the barely discernible sound of the wind coming through the air vents. Maxim was sitting on one of the rough stools, leaning his elbows on his knees and tapping his fingers softly on his trousers. Andrey, Roman, and Lech had left a long time ago, and this silence was starting to get on his nerves. He felt like a stranger in this place, as if the walls were carefully watching his every move. He stood up and looked around. A large wooden table with a massive drawer, which looked a little out of place among the rest of the modest furnishings, attracted the eye in itself. The drawer was slightly ajar. "Hey," he muttered to himself, stepping closer. The wood creaked as he carefully pulled out the drawer. There was a folder inside. It was battered and streaked with water, but the name on its cover made him tense up. In black marker was written, "Offering to the Darkness." Maxim froze. He didn't want to open the binding, but his curiosity got the better of him. With trembling hands, he pulled out a folder, put it on the table, and slowly opened it. Photo. Dozens of photos. The first one showed a man with a rope around his neck, suspended so that his feet almost touched the ground. His eyes stared straight into the camera, frozen in unspeakable horror. The next one was of a woman. Her face was blurred, but there were deep bluish finger marks on her neck. Maxim quickly scrolled through a few more. Children. One was lying in a puddle with frozen water around him. His face was covered with ice, and his mouth was frozen in a silent scream. The other was covered with earth, from under which only his hand was visible. It was a child's hand, no doubt about it. Maxim's hands began to tremble. He continued flipping through the photos, feeling his insides constrict with horror. There were dozens of people here, more than 30. Singles and families. Frozen, drowned, strangled, stabbed, burned alive. He saw a photo of a naked and mud-smeared man trapped in a metal trap. Andrey was also in this photo. He held the gun overhang, pressed the man's body to the ground with his foot, taking selfies as if with a hunting trophy. It was scrawled on the photo, "Successful hunting." In another photo, he was pulling a woman's body out of the river by a thin rope. Andrey's face was focused, gambling. The photo was also signed, "Happy Fishing." Maxim swallowed, feeling his throat go dry. His head began to spin, and he took a step back and almost fell. Andrew. It's him. Damn. It's him. He's a maniac. We're trapped. Bitch, what should I do? Thoughts washed over him like a cold wave. He slammed the folder shut and threw it on the floor. He couldn't just sit here. I had to find the others and get out somehow. Maxim headed for the exit, but as soon as he took hold of the handle of the manhole cover into the dugout, it abruptly opened. Andrey was standing at the manhole. Maxim froze, his heart pounding. He opened his mouth, trying to say something, but Andrey acted faster. With a sudden movement, he pulled a small gas canister out of his pocket and sprayed Max in the face. Maxim screamed and fell down the stairs, clutching his eyes, knelt down, gasping and coughing, pressing his face to his palms. The acrid smell instantly spread through the room, and Andrey, standing over him, only watched coldly, covering his face with his sleeve. "Hush, hush," he said calmly, when Maxim was quiet, trying to catch his breath. Andrey sank into the dugout. His footsteps sounded soft, almost noiseless. And then, with frightening method, Andrey kicked Maxim, knocked him down, tied his hands and feet, and left him lying on the floor. Maxim was not conscious for long. Andrey stunned him with a strong blow to the head. The faint light from the overhead lamp illuminated the folder lying on the floor. When Andrey saw her, he stopped, not holding back a slight, barely noticeable grin. "I found it, you little bitch," he said softly, bending down to pick up the folder. He slowly ran his fingers along its edge, as if greeting an old acquaintance. I'll have to be more careful next time. He put the folder on the table, carefully straightened the corners of the paper. Then he took his phone out of his pocket and took several pictures. A folder, a table, Max's face, whose limp body was still lying on the floor. In the pictures, it looked beautiful, as if death and fear in this place had become art. Andrey smiled to himself and took a selfie, put his phone away, and looked at Max. The man's face twisted into a grim smile, and his eyes flashed with predatory joy. You found it all by yourself. I got in by myself, he said, more to himself. So you've earned your role. He opened a drawer and took out a tube of instant glue. When Maxime woke up, his consciousness was struggling through a thick, sticky veil. My head ached, and my mouth was dry. He wanted to rub his eyes, but he couldn't move. Her lips looked stuck together, and her eyelids were glued shut. He jerked his hand, but nothing happened. Panic began to rise slowly, like a cold wave, flooding his mind and his entire gut. The attempt to move his foot ended in the same thing. He felt something hard and cold wrapping around his arms and legs. Cement. He was trapped in a cement mass, frozen solid. His body was in a humiliating position, on all fours, without clothes, completely exposed. Maxime made a hollow, pitiful sound. He tried to scream, but only the air escaped from his throat, turning into an inarticulate mumble. Don't move, came a calm, even voice. Maxime shuddered. The voice belonged to Andrey. He was very close, but Maxime couldn't see him. His eyelids remained sealed, and his movements were limited by a cement grip. You're awake, Andrey continued, his voice low, almost affectionate. Great. I was worried that you'd miss the fun. Maxime growled again, his head jerking from side to side, like a blind animal trying to sense a predator nearby. Don't worry, Max, Andrey whispered, his footsteps getting closer. Everything is under control. You're completely mine now. Maxime felt the touch. Andrey's palm gently ran over his back, leaving behind a sticky, ominous feeling. Do you know what the most interesting thing is? Andrey said, and his voice began to tremble with barely suppressed laughter. You think it's just an accident. You think it could have been different. But you actually came here to make it happen. His hand slowly slid down to Max's buttocks, squeezing roughly, bruising his skin. Maxime made a muffled, intermittent sound. His body jerked as much as the cement would allow. Don't be afraid, Andrey continued, his voice getting quieter and quieter, breaking into a whisper. Everything will be fine. It's a new experience. Maxime tried to twitch. His sounds became louder and more desperate. But Andrey just grinned. His fingers lingered on Max's skin, and then he abruptly squeezed harder, causing him to gasp in panic. Well, Andrew suddenly said, calling Max by his first name, as he was called in childhood. The voice became low, rough, and broken, as if another person were speaking. Your Uncle Valera is here. Do you remember him? You haven't seen him for a long time. Now he's going to play with you. Maxime began to mumble again, louder, stronger, drowning in his own fear. Andrey walked around him, bent down to his ear and whispered, I've been waiting for this for a long time. Long. And do you know what the scariest thing is? Now there's no need to wait anymore. He got up and walked over to the table where the camera was. The lens was pointed directly at Max. Andrey smiled at the camera, his face distorted into a terrible grimace. He put the radio on the table and turned it on, and the hoarse words of Alexei, still alive, came from the air. He was praying. God! Help! Get me out of here! Get me out, bitch! I'll never do it again. Andrey listened and turned the volume up to full. Remember this moment, Max. Death is too easy. We're going to play for a long time. He turned on the camera and returned to Max. His hand slid down again, and a soft, strangled groan was heard in the room, mixed with Andrey's hoarse laughter.